Hello and welcome to the first in a set of videos about Chapter 11 of Government in America, focusing on Congress. This set of videos is going to have 5 videos, I expect, 3 on the chapter itself, and then at the end I'm going to do an extra video each for the House and the Senate to talk a little bit about some particular quirks about elections and procedures in those chambers that I think are useful to know about. So let's start off just by talking about Congress in general as a refresher for things that are covered in Article 1 of the Constitution and elsewhere. So who's in Congress? There are 435 members of the House of Representatives and there are 100 senators. There are a few non-voting delegates or members to the House of Representatives, but they don't really have a much political power and voting power, so we're going to focus on the 435 and the 100. Now, one thing that is still true today, a little less true than it was, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago, is that the makeup of both the House and the Senate is not fully representative of the American population. The people who tend to get elected to the Senate and to the House of Representatives do tend to be disproportionately white, male, and Protestant. That is changing. It is changing slowly. But that is something to be aware of when thinking about how well does our representative body represent us. Beyond just the who's in Congress, there's the who stays in Congress question, which brings up incumbency. The incumbent is the person who currently holds the job. And in both the House and the Senate, most incumbents get reelected. Normally it's 80 to 90% of incumbents who are running for reelection are successful. That means that if you want to switch a seat, if you're the Democrats and you want to get control of a seat that the Republicans control, or you're a Republican who wants control of a seat that the Democrats control, it's going to be very hard, not impossible, but hard to defeat somebody who's already in the job. Your better bet is to find an open seat, a seat where there is no incumbent running. Perhaps the incumbent retired. Perhaps the incumbent has decided to give up the job and seek another one. Whatever the reason, if the seat is open and neither side has the incumbency advantage, that creates more of a chance of it flipping from control of one party to the other. Now, we've discussed before the idea of party realignment, that a particular region of the country or the country as a whole can see voters move from one party to another. If there is a party realignment going on, then that can make incumbents more vulnerable than they would normally be. Because you can look particularly at Democratic senators in the South over the last 20 years for examples of this. If the voters in that area are steadily moving away from the Democratic Party and to the Republican Party, well then sooner or later, even the incumbency advantage isn't going to protect you, and you face pretty heavy odds of getting reelected, and several Democratic incumbents in southern states have been defeated for reelection over the last few cycles. So what is it that makes incumbents so powerful? What are the advantages that they have? One of them is that incumbents can raise more money. Just by virtue of the fact that they are already in the job and already have some sort of say over legislation, they're going to attract more donors. And then they can use that money for advertising, which will hopefully benefit them in some way. Plus, the fact that they are incumbents and they do work gives them certain advantages as well, because they can do things that make them look good and then claim credit for it, which is kind of putting a deposit in the bank that they can withdraw from when it comes to be election time. Hey, remember this good thing I did? Well, that's why you should reelect me, so I can continue doing more of that good stuff. in the future. If you're not the incumbent, you can't say, hey, look, here's what I've done for you. All you can do is promise that you will do something in the future, which might be valuable, but it doesn't have the same value as being able to point to what it is that you've actually already done. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of claiming credit. You want to claim credit for the things that you do for your constituents. The constituents are the people that you represent, the people who are going to be able to vote for you next time around, whether they did or not. These are the people that you need to be on their good side, because if you're not, they're going to come after you on election day. So if I'm a senator or a representative, how do I get on my constituents' good side? Well, one thing I can do is casework. If my constituents have a question about the government, I can have staff on hand that will answer that question and help them solve their problem. Or if my constituents are running into an issue with the government, my staff or I can help intercede and maybe try and get that problem solved. Oh, did you have problems with getting your Social Security paperwork? Well, let's have one of our constituent service people help you out. Are you wondering what it's going to take in order to get this change to insurance laws put through? Well, let someone from my office get your information, and we'll help you out with that. That's casework. So that's setting up an office, setting up some kind of a staff that their job is to answer calls, solve problems, and hopefully by doing so, give a positive impression of the senator or the representative to the constituent. Okay. Now, I don't want to come across here as acting like that's purely a cynical or greedy thing for the senator or the representative to be doing. That is the senator and representative's job in part, and a lot of senators and representatives care about doing that job well. But it is also the fact that, in this case, doing the job well will have a positive payoff in creating a vibe of good feeling that might lead to a vote on election day. So that's done on more of a one-to-one basis, that kind of casework. Pork barrel spending is another thing that senators and representatives can take credit for. And the idea of pork barrel spending is that a law can have general instructions of, let's spend so much money on highways. In addition to that, it can have specific instructions to spend this amount of money on this specific highway project. So if I'm trying to get Congressman Smith to vote for my bill, and I'm the leadership of the House or the Senate, I can go to Congressman Smith and say, if in the highway bill we put in money specifically to fix the main street in your district, would you be willing to vote for us on this bill? And the Congressman Smith might say, that sounds like a pretty good deal, because then I can go back home and I can get my picture taken in front of the newly repaired road and say, here's what I've been able to do for you, the people of my district or the people of my state. So pork barrel spending is spending that's specifically targeted to a specific place, to a specific project, which then a senator or representative would be able to take credit for. There's actually been a little bit of a cut down in pork barrel spending over the last, say, 10 years or so, because of different rules that the House and the Senate have adopted. Because the downside to pork barrel spending is that when it gets reported on, then yes, you get the good publicity from this road or whatever that got taken care of in your district, but it might look like you're trading your vote for this money. And then voters who are a little leery of corruption and the influence of money and things like that might actually hold that against you. So they might not give you credit for it. They might be upset with you over it. So that thinking led to the leadership in the House and in the Senate to maybe cut back a little bit on the pork barrel spending, but it is still a factor and still something that can have an influence and be something that an incumbent can use to his or her advantage. Okay. Now, having done all of this, having helped constituents and brought money to the district and done all of these things, that hopefully are helpful, then the person will be, the senator or the representative will hopefully get some attention for it from the news picture in the newspaper or the website, video online, shared on social media, something on the local TV news. And so even people who aren't paying a lot of attention to politics are going to hear about Representative Smith or Senator Jones. And that's going to improve what's called the name recognition of the senator or the representative. So that if you ask somebody, have you heard of Smith or Jones? They'll say, oh yeah, that's the senator person or what have you. Right? That's an advantage, because if a challenger to the incumbent doesn't have that name recognition, then you might hear, well, Johnson's running. Who's Johnson? I've never heard of Johnson. What do I know about Johnson? Okay, and that's a disadvantage. So the improved name recognition that comes from being an incumbent is a thing that helps a lot of incumbents to win. All right. Then all of this creates a cycle. If I'm interested in running for office, I know that incumbents are hard to beat. So that means that I might not even want to challenge an incumbent. I might want to hold back and wait until there's an open seat to run. So that means that the people who are willing to run against incumbents are probably the people who are weaker as candidates. They don't have as much money. They don't have as much name recognition. And then, therefore, because they are a weaker candidate, they are more likely to lose against the incumbent, which then reinforces the idea that incumbents are hard to beat, which makes it harder to get candidates who will run against incumbents. So this cycle and this awareness is one of those things that factors into how incumbents have advantages to work with. And there are tools that we haven't talked about at the moment that allow incumbents to increase that name recognition more. All right, so that will wrap it up for this video. We'll be back in the next, but until then, I will leave you with these questions for thought and reflection.